Welcome to Forum 360 on Fusion, your PBS channel. This is Leslie Ungar, your host today. Have you ever thought about what it means to be human? Established in 2010, the Museum of Psychology at the University of Akron is trying to help us answer that question. Featuring both temporary and permanent exhibits, the museum aims to bring the history of psychology to life by providing visitors with an opportunity to explore what it means to be human. Please welcome to Forum 360 their Executive Director, David Baker.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you. So my first question for you, because I may have even gotten it wrong in the introduction, are you a center for the history of psychology or are you a museum?
We're both.
You're both?
We're both.
So what do you, if you meet someone, how do you introduce yourself?
Yeah. It's a great question, and it's something that I answer that question frequently. We began at the University of Akron in 1965 as the Archives of the History of American Psychology. So that's how we began. We collected, and we can talk about this more, we collect the personal papers of psychologists. That enterprise grew rapidly, and I came on board in 1999. We were, at that time, the largest collection of its kind in the world. We were in the basement of the Polsky building. We had 10,000 square feet of space, and we had all this material, all these psychologists who had donated their personal papers. And that's things like correspondence, drafts of manuscripts, all this kind of material that tells us about the history of psychology. But in addition, they would often, when psychologists were donating materials to the archives, they would say, would you like this equipment from my laboratory? Would you like these books from my library? I have these films, I have these photographs. So when I came in 1999, I realized that we had this wealth of material. Scholars visit, they still do, from all over the world to work in the archives, using archival materials.
You know, when I was working on my master's thesis a few decades ago, the resource material was in Cleveland and I couldn't take it out, so I had to go there to use it. And is that the same kind of thing? So these experts come to use the resources that you have?
They come and work on site. Because archival material, the Archives of the History of American Psychology, basically is our kind of our research component. So if there's a series of letters, correspondence between psychologists, we have the only copy of that that exists. So we can't lend that out, we can't send that out. So people come and use that on site. So what I decided when I arrived was we needed to expand. We needed more space for our material.
What, 10,000 feet wasn't enough?
No, we had 25,000 square feet of material, basically.
Wow.
So I thought, why not begin to put some of this material on display and exhibit? So we have all these famous artifacts and objects in the history of psychology. Stanley Milgram's simulated shock generator from his famous studies of obedience and conformity. Anyone that's taken an introductory psychology course is familiar with that. And we have a lot of items like that. So we wanted to put those on public display. So it's too long a story to tell here, but I managed to secure a building, a dedicated building that was donated to us, that was on our campus. It was donated by Roadway Express, the former shipping company. This is a 75,000 square foot building. It's on the edge of campus on the corner of College and Mill. A donor generously provided $5 million in support for us to begin renovations. So a long-winded way to answer your question, we're the Cummings Center for the History of Psychology.
So you're the Center for the History of Psychology.
Yes, and we have three components.
Okay.
You know, our beginnings, our bedrock, the Archives of the History of American Psychology.
Okay.
The National Museum of Psychology, which will formally open this summer, early this summer in May or June. And we are under construction now to include the Institute for Human Science and Culture. So if you came to the Cummings Center on the corner of College and Mill,
yes.
The first floor is the
not far from the. Is the pizza shop still there?
It's not there anymore, but it's
So I'm dating. So now you know when I was in college, it was there.
Yes, yeah, right. And that was a police station, and now it's something else. But so then you'd come to that building. The first floor will be our public space. The National Museum of Psychology is for everyone. to come in and explore our materials, to see museum quality exhibits that all.
So when you have museum quality exhibits, so we have a children's museum in Akron now, and we have an art museum, and Cleveland has museums, and New York has museums, and we have zoos, and we have all kinds of things. Why a museum on psychology? Like, how does it benefit me as a citizen to go and see the Museum of Psychology?
A number of reasons. First and foremost, our byline is exploring what it means to be human. I like to say everyone is a psychologist. We all
Kind of like everyone's a quarterback, right? Chair quarterback, armchair quarterback,
armchair
right?
quarterback.
Everyone is an armchair psychologist.
Everyone's an armchair psychologist.
Yes,
right?
that's true.
We're all interested in why we think the way we think, why we feel the way that we do. We have questions about our relationships to others. And so we try to present psychology as a science, which it is, as a profession, which it is, and as an agent of social change, which it is. So we want to introduce people. I think there's a lot of stereotypes. I think people think of psychology and psychologists, and all they think is psychotherapy. Well, there's so much more. And all of those things are fascinating in their own right, and they all bear on the central question, what does it mean to be human? So I'm confident that visitors to the museum will learn something about themselves, they'll learn something about others, and I think that's an exciting proposition.
Now, I can imagine, if I put myself back in my thesis days, that I could write a thesis, or you could probably write 100 theses on what it means to be human. But if you had to answer that while standing on one foot, how would you answer that question, what it means to be human?
Well, it's different for everybody. For me, I would say that having studied psychology and been immersed in psychology for all of my adult life, I would say that one of the tenets of being human to me is that we're fallible. And I think whether you take that from a philosophical perspective, a psychological perspective, a religious perspective, that to me is becoming more evident. We're fallible.
Now, as executive director, is your role more strategic to have this vision and march the center and the museum toward this vision, or is your role more tactical? What gets displayed? How does it get displayed? So would you say your role is more strategic or more tactical?
I think they're a combination of both. As we've grown over time, over the 18 years that I've been here, we've enjoyed tremendous growth. And I've become more of a vision, more of a, I guess, the executive director position. I have a staff of 8. We all work very closely together. We have a team of professionals. I value their input. I value their expertise. And we make decisions jointly. I have general ideas, general directions, things that I would like to see happen, but it's a very inclusive, a very democratic process. And I'm clear in my own thinking that we all benefit from the best thinking of everyone.
I used to have a client that said 2 heads are better than 1, even if 1 head is a cabbage.
We have 8 very good heads.
Now, I've read that you're an affiliate of the Smithsonian Institution. So how and why are you an affiliate of the Smithsonian?
Yeah, it's terrific. It's been a terrific association. A number of years ago, and I say a number, now maybe is 20, that the current secretary of the Smithsonian, well, this was maybe 10 years ago.
I know. I often lose track of time.
I'm very bad with dates.
It goes so fast.
One of the secretaries of the Smithsonian wanted to put a Smithsonian in every community. The reality is that the vast, vast majority of the Smithsonian holdings will never see the light of day. So there was this impulse to try to place the Smithsonian in every community in America. That was the creation.
Kind of like going out to the communities, because everyone's not going to even get to. Everyone's not going to get to the Smithsonian.
And the Smithsonian has all these riches to share. So the affiliations program was developed as a way of finding partners in local communities. I found out about the program after I was here, and I said, we have a wonderful collection in psychology, the largest collection of its kind in the world. So I made some inquiries. We went through the application process, and I was very pleased when we were accepted into the program.
Now, you showcase artifacts from the center's vast special collections. What are some artifacts, perhaps some of your favorites, what are some artifacts that you have showcased so that we go from kind of a vague artifacts? Can you bring some of those to life?
Sure. It's asking, that's a question I'm asked frequently, and I would say it's like saying, which is your favorite child? So I don't have a favorite, but we have some that are much more noticeable than others. So the simulated shock generator from Stanley Milgram's Studies of Obedience and Conformity, one of the most important social science experiments of the 20th century. We have a Bobo doll, the little inflatable Bobo dolls that kids used to get that you'd punch and they'd pop back up. We have one of those that came from original studies on social learning, modeling of aggression, done by another Stanford psychologist, Al Bandura. He was one of the very first people to empirically investigate the effects of television violence on children's behavior. Another iconic study in the history of psychology. Another set of objects comes from the Stanford prison experiment. Another psychologist at Stanford, social psychologist Phil Zimbardo, in the 1970s set up a mock prison in the basement of the psychology department at Stanford University. And we have a prison door, uniforms, a number of objects, all very recognizable to anyone that's taken an introduction to psychology course. And if you haven't taken one, the exhibits in the museum will interpret those to tell us more about ourselves.
We're going to take a break for just a moment to reintroduce our topic today, the Center for the History of Psychology, with the Executive Director, David Baker, located at the corner of College and Mill at the University of Akron, soon to open this spring.
Yes.
Okay, good. Now, you're expanding, or have expanded and are continuing to expand, thanks to a gift, believe $3.5 million gift from psychologist Nicholas Cummings and his wife, Dorothy. Give both of them credit for that. At the time you said we'll have a bigger world-class museum and it will be a destination. Why, from your experience, perhaps with humans or psychologically, why does someone choose that has the ability to donate? What makes someone decide to give to this good organization, versus this good organization?
There's a lot of different, there are as many reasons as there are donors. In the case of the Cummings and their total gift, there were two gifts, $3.5 million and then an additional $1.5 million. So a total of $5 million that they have really invested in us and invested in giving us all this remarkable resource. Dr. Cummings has been an important, influential person in American psychology. It's been his life. And so he's passionate about that, and he's committed to that, and he believes in what it is that we're doing to not only continue to support research into the history of psychology, but also to bring psychology to the public.
Now, are his and her ties to psychology, or do they have ties to the University of Akron?
Their ties are to psychology. And it's a nice example of the reach that the center has.
That crosses past and over alumni or citizens of the area.
And as I said, everyone is a psychologist, everyone's interested in psychology, and it's true, the collection is that large and that important that it has something for everyone.
Now, what have you learned? I always say that we're very fortunate in Northeast Ohio. We have thousands of nonprofits, and most of them are wonderful nonprofits. But what have you learned about donors that either surprised you or would surprise us?
That's a great question. And
well, finally, I asked you a question that you haven't gotten asked 10 times, so that's good.
Yeah.
But what would surprise us?
What would surprise us? That some people are exceedingly generous.
And are you privy at all to the decision making of how a donor chooses, organization A over organization B? Can you help us understand that at all?
When I spend a lot of my time doing development work, I spend a lot of time cultivating donors, spending time with donors. I learn about their interests. but largely I'm there to make my case. And I'm not always privy to what kinds of decisions that they're making. But I would say, as I think about examples, there have been plenty of people that have shared with me what they were thinking or what their obligations are. I'll give you one example that comes to mind. There was a donor, a famous psychologist. He lived out west. And he was involved in some very important and seminal studies in psychology in the 1950s. And I met him through some other colleagues, and I shared with him information about the center. He had resources, and he had the ability to be a generous donor. And I met with him on a number of occasions. I had him come to Akron. He gave a presentation. He visited. We all really enjoyed our time together. He really was supportive of what we were doing. And there naturally became a time when we needed to discuss how he would like to be involved. And we were growing this campaign to build a new building and expand our services. And I met with him in his home, and we talked about it, and he was very honest. He said, I have a number of obligations and a number of interests. He was Native American. His father was Native American. He'd grown up in rural Oklahoma, and he had a strong commitment to the Native American population, particularly in Oklahoma. And so he was dedicating a portion of his sizable estate to a scholarship fund for Native American students to attend college. And I remember saying to him, that is a really worthy and good goal.
Even if it's not mine, it's a worthy goal.
Absolutely.
I want to make sure that we have time because I just had one visit to the center / museum, and I was shocked at the one display that I saw that I want you to talk about. So I want to talk about the Holocaust survivor recordings, discovered at the University of Akron, a reel of songs that were sung by Holocaust survivors in a camp in France after the war, and international media has covered this story. The reel is not what people think of when they think of a reel, all right? So could you tell us about the reel, what is on it, and why that became an international story?
Yeah, it's the most important discovery, I believe, in the 52-year existence of the archives and the center. So the reel that we're talking about is a spool. I describe it as a spool of wire, almost like a spool of fishing line, thin wire in small canisters. And these belong to a psychologist by the name of Dr. David Boder. Boder was a Lithuanian-born psychologist who had emigrated to America in the 1920s. He was interested in the study of trauma, and he believed that you could develop an index, a measure of trauma, by the speech and language people used to describe traumatic events. So unfortunately, he had a natural field study after World War II. Boder was Jewish himself, aware of the plight of European Jews before, during, and after the war. So he received a grant, a federal grant, to travel to Europe to interview what were referred to as displaced persons, refugees, Holocaust survivors in the main. And he took the newest technology, which was a wire recorder. So think of it like a tape recorder and now a digital recorder, but with wire.
Instead of tape.
They would record on wire. And he took this recorder, this wire recorder, and these spools of wire to Europe with him, and he visited a number of different displaced persons camps all throughout Europe over a period of about 6 months. One of them was in France, and in that camp, he conducted a series of interviews. Boder was the very first person to record the testimony of Holocaust survivors. And this is right after the war. This was in '46. And occasionally he would have people sing to him. And it was unclear exactly why he did that. Was that a way to prime memory? Was it a way to make people more comfortable? Was it a way and a means of witnessing history? I think it's a combination of all of those things. And on occasion, he would ask people to sing songs that they sang in the ghettos and in the concentration camps.
So on these and they sound like, even though they're on wire, they sound like any other recording, right?
They do. And what's amazing, there are a number of amazing parts to the story. One was we had no way to play these. So when David Boder's personal papers, his manuscript material, came to Akron, which it did in 1967, and these spools sat for 50 years.
Wow.
Because there's no way to play them. The wire recorders don't exist.
Okay, so so that begs the question, how do you play wire? I mean, it is basically wire. How do you play wire?
Well, you play it like you would play tape. It runs over a head. It's a magnetic tape that runs over a player.
So did somebody have to make?
So this was a wonderful part of the story. It nagged and nagged and nagged at me that we had no way to hear these. And people would say, scholars would say to us and contact us and even visit and say, we know that you have some spools. Do you know what's on them? There's a missing reel of music that Boder made. And we would say, we don't know. We don't have a way to play them. So a number of staff at the university were curious. And amazingly, they spent 3 years salvaging parts, buying parts on eBay, and they produced an audio time machine. They built us a brand new wire recorder. And we were able to play and find that missing reel of music.
So you were able to play all of them. So are they all songs? Are they all these displaced people, these survivors, singing? Are there interviews?
There's interviews. There's some other material that Boder had done. But of significance, of historical significance, was this lost reel of songs. This reel in particular, this spool of wire, has 6 songs. 4 sung by a survivor. They're traditional Yiddish folk songs. And then 2 of the songs were sung by a woman, Guda Frank. And these were songs, one was a Jewish song of resistance. We learned quickly, actually, we shared this immediately with the Holocaust Museum in Washington. And they were quite excited with the find. It's been terrific. They did translations. They told us more about the historical significance of those.
Now, when the museum/center opens, will we be able to hear these songs when we visit the exhibits?
Yeah, this in the exhibits that will open, the permanent exhibits that will open now, this will not be included in those. But we are working on building a virtual exhibit, and that will be one of the exhibits that we'll have that anyone from anywhere in the world can
listen at any time.
Can learn and listen.
In the couple minutes we have remaining, I'm going to ask you for 1 or 2 word answers. You've had several roles you've been a very valued, flexible person at the University of Akron, and you've had many different roles. What would you say your favorite role has been?
Well, hands down, being the executive director of the Cummings Center for the History of Psychology.
You've been in Akron now
18 years.
18 years. Okay, so long enough to be able to answer Swenson's or Skyway.
Swenson's.
Okay. Best thing, as someone that's been here 18 years, 18, very important number, in Hebrew, to life. The best thing about Northeast Ohio?
The people.
Something that would surprise us about the University of Akron?
It houses the world's greatest collection of material in the history of psychology.
That would surprise us. And what you like best about Texas? Something that you like best. You spent some years in Texas.
20.
20. Something that you like best about Texas, and it can't be the barbecue. Okay, that's too easy.
The horizon.
The horizon, flat as it is.
Yeah.
Do you notice? I have to ask, do you notice a difference between, like, say, the hills of Northeast Ohio and the flatness of Texas?
Yeah, the horizon, the sky.
Did you come?
It's big sky.
Did you come to Akron with a cowboy hat and an accent?
No.
No.
I grew up in between New York and Philadelphia, so.
So you're glad that the Eagles won?
Very.
Okay. Just had to ask about that. Today we've learned about a fairly new kid on the block that has received a lot of national and international attention. We have learned that a museum/center here in Akron new by museum standards, is already an affiliate of the well-known Smithsonian institution. We have also learned that one individual, in this case two, a couple, can make a difference, a very large footprint here and across the world. We appreciate our guest today, Executive Director David Baker from the Cummings Center of Psychology. Let me ask you, you're going to be opening, will the opening be open to the public?
Yep, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
How will the public know about the center is open?
We have a very active presence on social media, Facebook.
So we would go to where on Facebook?
Just go to our homepage, www.uakron.edu/cchb.
Okay. What is one takeaway that you think that people will have from their first visit?
They'll be surprised that psychology involves so many different things.
Thank you for joining us on Forum 360. I'm Leslie Ungar, bringing you a global outlook with a local view.
Forum 360 is brought to you with support from Electric Impulse Communications, Kim and Harvey Nelson, Rubber City Radio Group, Akronist.com, Hudson Cable, Medical Mutual of Ohio, Forum 360 supporters, and the Shaw Jewish Community Center of Akron.